Welcome to a quiet night of ghostly tales. As the world slows down, we'll drift through haunted places and restless spirits, carried softly by stories meant to guide you into sleep. Do you believe ghosts are echoes of the past, or something still watching us now? Let me know your thoughts, and together, let's step into the whispers of the unknown. Tonight our journey begins at sea, where the horizon stretches endlessly, and the waves hide secrets older than memory itself. Out there in the deep silence between stars and water, legends say there are ships that do not belong to this world. Some are wrecks, long forgotten, but still seen gliding across the waves. Others are crewed by sailors who should have been laid to rest centuries ago. And then there is one name that has haunted seafarers more than any other, a ship cursed to sail forever with no hope of reaching safe harbor, the Flying Dutchman. The story drifts back to the 17th century, an age of sails and storms, when the Dutch were masters of the seas. According to legend, a proud captain, often called Hendrik van der Decken, tried to round the Cape of Good Hope, that storm-lashed tip of Africa, where the Atlantic and Indian Oceans collide. The winds howled, the waves rose higher, and his crew begged him to turn back. But the captain, filled with stubborn pride, refused to give up. Some versions say he cursed the heavens. Others say he swore he would round the Cape even if it took him until Judgment Day. And so the punishment fell. The ship was struck with a terrible fate, condemned to wander the oceans for eternity, never able to return. Flying Dutchman became a phantom, a ship of the dead gliding silently across the waters, glowing faintly in the night, its sails tattered but still catching ghostly winds. For sailors who spotted her, the vision was a dreadful omen. To see the Dutchman meant disaster was near. Storms, wrecks, or death would soon follow. One of the earliest written mentions of this ghostly ship comes from the late 1700s. By then, the legend had already taken hold in maritime folklore, whispered by sailors of many nations. But it was in the 19th century that the Dutchman truly became famous, especially after stories spread of real sightings. Naval officers, merchant captains, and common sailors alike swore they had seen the cursed vessel rising from the mist. One of the most famous accounts came in 1881 when Prince George of Wales, who later became King George of England, was aboard the Royal Navy ship Bacchante. In his log, he described how he and several others saw a strange ship glowing red in the early morning light. The phantom crossed their path and then vanished suddenly, leaving no trace on the calm sea. Hours later, the sailor who had first spotted it fell to his death from the mast. For the crew, it seemed undeniable proof that the Flying Dutchman had brought misfortune with her passing. Other reports continued well into the 20th century. During both world wars, sailors claimed to see ghostly ships gliding across the waves, their sails bright in the moonlight. Some even believed the Dutchman appeared more often during times of great death and chaos, as if feeding on human tragedy. Imagine being alone on night watch, the sea around you endless and black, when suddenly you see a tall, masted vessel appear out of nothing, silent and shining as though lit from within. Would you believe your eyes? Tell yourself it was just a trick of the sea haze. But the legend of the Flying Dutchman is more than just a sailor. It is a story that reflects human fears of the ocean and of eternity itself. The captain's curse is a warning against arrogance, against defying forces greater than ourselves. For centuries, sailors faced the sea with respect and dread, knowing that one storm could end a voyage. One wrong choice could cost an entire crew their lives. To speak of the Dutchman was to give form to those fears, to whisper of what happens when a man challenges fate and is doomed forever. Some versions of the tale even describe ghostly sailors standing at the rails, their faces pale and hollow, staring out at the world they can never join again. Others speak of phantom lights glowing from within the ship, lanterns swinging gently, though no living hand touches them. There are stories of voices carried on the wind, desperate cries for help, though no ship is there to be saved, and always the ending is the same. Those who see the Flying Dutchman are left unsettled, as if they have glimpsed not just a ghost, but the very weight of a curse that never dies. The image of the Flying Dutchman has appeared in countless forms, yet always carries that same aura of unease. Some say she glides just above the surface of the water, her hull never touching the waves. Others describe her as a shadow on the horizon, sailing against the wind as if the natural laws of the sea no longer apply. When lightning flashes across a storm, some claim to have seen her silhouette for just an instant, her rigging stark against the sky, only for her to vanish before the thunder is even rolled. What makes these stories so compelling is the number of witnesses who swore to their truth. Seasoned sailors who spent their lives at sea were not easily fooled. They knew the tricks of the ocean, the play of fog, the illusions created by mirages like the Fata Morgana, and yet many insisted that what they saw was no natural phenomenon. They described details too vivid, too precise. The cut of the sails, the tilt of the masts, the glow of lanterns swaying in the darkness. Could so many have been mistaken? Or was something else truly out there upon the waves? To those who lived their lives on ships, the Dutchman's appearance was not just a mystery, but a warning. To see her meant that doom was close at hand. Some ships were wrecked within hours of a sighting. Others returned safely. But the crew carried a heavy dread that lingered long after. The legend grew so powerful that even those who never saw her felt her presence. Sailors whispered prayers before setting sail, hoping they would not be the ones to glimpse her tattered sails glowing in the mist. One of the most chilling aspects of the tale is the fate of her crew. If the captain is cursed, then so too are the men who served under him. Some stories say their souls are bound to the vessel, unable to leave. They are seen pacing the deck in silence, their faces pale as bone, eyes empty of all light. Other versions speak of their voices carried on the wind, shouting for help, begging to be released. But their cries are never answered, for no living ship can reach them. Like the captain, they are trapped in an endless voyage, condemned to sail until the end of time. There is also the haunting question of why the Dutchman appears to the living at all. Some believe it is a warning, a final act of mercy, telling sailors to turn back before disaster strikes. Others say the cursed crew are forever seeking contact, desperate for a chance to pass letters to the living world. In a few accounts, sailors claim the ghostly crew hailed them, begging them to deliver messages to loved ones on land. But accepting these messages was thought to be a terrible mistake, for the bearer would then be dragged into the curse themselves. Whether seen as a warning or a temptation, the Dutchman's approach was never welcome. Writers and artists have been drawn to the legend for centuries, giving it new shapes and voices. The German poet Heinrich Heine wrote of the cursed captain, and Richard Wagner turned the story into his famous opera, The Flying Dutchman. In Wagner's telling, the captain is allowed to come ashore once every 7 years, seeking a woman's love to break the curse. It is a more romantic version, giving him a chance for redemption, though the weight of doom still hangs heavily over the tale. Through such retellings, the Dutchman became not just a sailor's superstition, but a symbol of eternal wandering, of humanity's struggle against forces too vast to overcome. Even today, the story has not faded. Modern sailors still whisper of lights seen in strange places, or of phantom ships gliding silently across calm seas. The Flying Dutchman has found its way into films, novels, and folklore far beyond the oceans where the story first took root. The sight of a ship doomed to sail forever resonates deeply with us, because it is not only a story of the sea, but of the human condition itself. What could be more haunting than a journey without end, a longing that can never be satisfied, a home that can never be reached? The ocean has always carried a weight of mystery. Its vastness, its power, its ability to both give life and take it away, has shaped the stories of every coastal people. The Flying Dutchman stands at the center of those stories as a reminder of what happens when pride meets fate, when defiance meets the forces we cannot control. For sailors, she was more than a legend. She was a shadow always lurking at the edge of their voyages, a presence felt even when unseen. And perhaps that is why the story has endured for centuries. For in the Dutchman, we see our fears reflected back at us, as endless and restless as the sea itself. To imagine the Dutchman is to picture the sea at its most haunting. You can almost feel the damp wind on your face, hear the groan of wood against the waves, and catch a glimpse of lantern light that should not be there. Some sailors described her sails as glowing faintly, like pale cloth lit from within. Others spoke of a red or green shimmer, casting an eerie reflection across the water. The most unsettling detail, however, was the silence. A ship that size should creak and moan, ropes snapping against the masts, waves lapping at the hull. Yet the Dutchman moved without a sound, as though the ocean itself made way for her cursed passage. One account from the 1830s tells of a merchant vessel crossing the Indian Ocean that came upon what seemed to be a tall ship bearing down on them. The crew braced for impact, certain they would collide, but as the ghostly vessel drew closer, it became clear she was not of this world. The Dutchman passed straight through the merchant ship, her glowing rigging cutting across the night, leaving behind nothing but a chill in the air and terror in the hearts of those who had seen her. The men later swore their hair turned gray overnight, so deep was their fright. Stories like these often carried the weight of prophecy. To see the Dutchman was to invite misfortune, sometimes in subtle ways. A sudden illness, an unexpected storm, or the quiet disappearance of a sailor who never returned from his watch. Many captains warned their crews never to speak of a sighting aloud, fearing the words themselves would draw the curse closer. Silence, it seemed, was the only protection against the ship that never rested. It is interesting to notice how the legend of the Flying Dutchman changes depending on who tells it. In some Dutch versions, the captain is a tragic figure, a man who swore too fiercely and brought ruin upon himself and his crew. In English and German tales, he becomes almost a villain, cursed because of arrogance, pride, or even dealings with the devil. The core of the story, however, remains the same. A ship condemned to wander forever, carrying men who can never step onto solid ground again. This persistence of the tale across cultures shows how deeply it spoke to the shared fears of sailors. For those who lived and died by the sea, the ocean was not just a physical reality, but a spiritual one. Every storm seemed alive. Every strange light on the horizon could be a sign. In that world, the Dutchman was not simply a legend, but a reminder of the thin veil between the living and the dead. To sailors, the sea was a graveyard without end, filled with countless souls swallowed by storms, battles, and shipwrecks. Was it so unthinkable that one ship, cursed in life, should continue sailing after death? Even the name itself carries a weight of mystery. The term Flying Dutchman may have come from the idea that she moved too quickly, appearing and vanishing in an instant, as if flying over the waves. But it may also reflect the nationality of her captain, for in the 17th century, the Dutch were among the most feared and respected sailors in the world. A Dutch captain cursed to eternal wandering would have been a tale with sharp edges, a reminder of both the strength and the hubris of those who ruled the seas. Over time, the Dutchman became more than a story told among sailors. She became a symbol that reached the shores of everyday life. When Wagner's opera premiered in 1843, the audience was captivated by the tragic figure of the captain doomed to seek redemption. Painters filled their canvases, storm-tossed ships, their sails glowing with unnatural light. Writers used the Dutchman as a metaphor for endless journeys, unattainable goals, and the loneliness of those who can never find home. And still, real accounts continued to pour in. Even as late as the 1930s and 1940s, naval officers claimed sightings near the Cape of Good Hope. One British ship logged a strange encounter with a vessel that appeared suddenly during clear weather, glowing in the dawn light. By the time they tried to signal her, she had vanished into thin air. Another story from the Second World War tells of a convoy crossing dangerous waters. Several sailors reported a tall ship crossing their path, sails full though no wind stirred the air. The officers dismissed it as stress and fatigue, but the men whispered quietly among themselves that they had seen the Dutchman, and they feared what was to come. Whether taken as truth, illusion, or myth, the Flying Dutchman left an imprint not easily forgotten. She represents something each sailor felt but rarely spoke of: the fear of being lost, cut off from land and loved ones, swallowed by an endless sea. To wander forever without rest is a fate more terrifying than death itself. And so the Dutchman sails on, her story passed from one generation to the next, whispered in quiet moments, told when the waves grow restless and the wind begins to howl. It is said that the Dutchman can appear at any time to any sailor, though most often near storm-lashed waters like the Cape of Good Hope. But perhaps that is just where our minds place her, on the edge of danger, where survival is never certain. And maybe that is the secret of the legend. The Dutchman is not bound to a single place. She is bound to fear itself, rising wherever sailors look out into the dark and wonder what is moving just beyond their sight. When we think of the Flying Dutchman, it is tempting to imagine her as nothing more than a story, a dramatic tale woven by sailors to pass long nights at sea. Yet the persistence of the legend hints at something deeper. For centuries in different oceans, across cultures and languages, people described the same vision: a spectral ship, glowing faintly, appearing from nowhere and vanishing without a trace. Could so many accounts be dismissed as coincidence? Or did they speak to something real that dwells within the vastness of the sea? Some skeptics point to natural explanations. A fata morgana mirage, caused by layers of hot and cold air bending light, can make ships appear to float in the air or shimmer ghost-like above the water. Exhausted sailors, their minds worn thin by sleepless nights and the endless rhythm of the waves, might mistake such illusions for something supernatural. Yet even when these explanations are offered, they do not fully quiet the unease. Because when you stand on the deck of a ship in the dead of night, staring into miles of empty horizon, it is difficult not to wonder if perhaps there are things the natural world cannot explain. There is also the sense that the Dutchman is more than a ghost story. She is a reflection of the ocean itself, beautiful and terrifying, vast and merciless. The sea offers freedom, adventure, and riches, but it also takes without warning. Thousands of ships have been lost without a trace, thousands of lives swallowed whole, leaving behind no marker but the grief of those on shore. In that silence, in those unanswered questions, legends take root. The Flying Dutchman may be one of those legends, born from the collective fear of sailors who knew just how fragile they were beneath the weight of the ocean. And yet, she is not only about fear. There's also tragedy in the Dutchman's tale. A captain who defied the heavens, a crew bound unwillingly to his fate, a ship that can never come home. It is the tragedy of longing, of endless searching without ever finding rest. Perhaps that is why the story touches us so deeply. We all know in some way what it feels like to long for something out of reach, to feel adrift and restless, to wonder if we will ever arrive at the place we are meant to be. The Dutchman magnifies that feeling into something eternal, a fate that stretches into forever. Writers and sailors alike have described her as a warning to those who defy the forces of nature, who think themselves greater than the sea. The Dutchman is a reminder of humility. Pride can be a curse, and some storms cannot be conquered. But there is another interpretation as well. Some see her not as a punishment, but as a guardian, a ship that appears to warn of danger, a phantom light that tries to turn sailors away from death. If this is true, then the Dutchman is not simply cursed, but bound to a duty she never chose, condemned to protect others even as her own crew remains lost. The legend has continued into modern times, woven into books, plays, and films. Yet, at its heart, it remains the same as it was centuries ago. A ship, a curse, and the eternal sea. The Dutchman sails on, drifting across the horizon of our imagination. And perhaps that is the true reason she has never vanished. Every time we look out at the ocean, we see its endlessness, its mystery, and its danger. And we need stories like the Flying Dutchman to make sense of that mystery, to give shape to the shadows that move just beyond our reach. So if you ever find yourself near the stormy waters of the Cape, or alone on a quiet deck at night with the stars overhead, you may feel a shiver in the wind. You may see a shape rise out of the mist, sails glowing faintly, crew silent at their posts. And if you do, remember the stories whispered for hundreds of years. The Dutchman never rests, never anchors, never reaches home. She is always there, somewhere on the dark horizon, gliding silently through the ages. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of the living world, the Flying Dutchman still sails. She will always sail, and those who glimpse her will never forget the sight, for it is not just a ship they see, but the embodiment of the ocean's greatest truth, that no matter how far we travel, how much we fight, there are forces beyond us, forces that can bind us forever. The Dutchman is not only a ghost on the waves, she is the sea itself, restless, eternal, and never truly at peace. The next time you hear the sound of distant waves or the moan of wind rattling the windows, think of her. Think of the crew pacing endlessly on deck, the captain staring into the horizon that never draws closer, the lanterns glowing in the darkness with no living hand to tend them. Think of the ship that can never come home, and know that somewhere in the vast and endless night of the ocean, she is still sailing. The ocean holds many secrets, but sometimes the most unsettling ones are not found on phantom ships lost to time, but on vessels that still remain with us, preserved in steel and memory. Our next story drifts from the age of sail into the modern era to one of the most storied aircraft carriers of the 20th century. She fought bravely in war, carried thousands of men across oceans, and earned a reputation as one of the most haunted ships in the United States Navy. Her name is the USS Hornet. The USS Hornet, commissioned in 1943 during the height of the Second World War, was no ordinary ship. She became a floating city nearly 900 feet long, carrying more than 3,000 men at a time. Her decks were alive with noise, the roar of aircraft engines, the thunder of takeoffs, the endless rhythm of sailors at work. She fought in nearly every major naval battle in the Pacific theater and helped secure victory in a conflict that spanned the globe. By the end of the war, the Hornet had earned more battle stars than almost any other carrier. But glory came at a terrible cost. The Hornet was nicknamed the Gray Ghost, not just for her striking presence, but for the lives that were lost within her steel hull. Aircraft crashed on her deck. Men were swept overboard into the restless sea. Fires broke out, claiming lives in smoke and flame, and countless sailors carried the scars of fear and trauma long after the battles ended. Some believe those emotions left an imprint on the ship, lingering like shadows that never fade. Others believe that some of the men never truly left at all. Visitors who walk the silent halls of the Hornet today often speak of strange encounters. The ship is preserved as a museum in Alameda, California, open to the public, and thousands of people tour her decks each year. Many come for history, to see the towering aircraft elevators and the cramped sleeping quarters where sailors once dreamed of home. But some leave with stories they did not expect. Stories of footsteps echoing in empty hallways, of doors slamming shut when no one was near, of figures in faded uniforms glimpsed only for a moment before vanishing into thin air. Staff members who work aboard the Hornet report that they sometimes feel watched, even when the ship is closed for the night. One described hearing heavy boots walking across the hangar deck, and the sound so vivid he was certain someone was there. Yet when he searched, the vast steel floor was empty, stretching into silence. Another staff member recalled entering a room and seeing a man in a World War II uniform standing by the wall. She blinked and he was gone. The spot where he stood was empty, and yet the air felt colder, heavier, as if something had passed through. Perhaps the most unsettling reports come from the engine rooms and lower decks, where the air grows thick and the lights dim. Here, maintenance crews have spoken of voices whispering in the dark, calling out in tones too low to understand. Some have felt a hand brush against their shoulder, only to turn and find no one there. A few even claim to hear the clang of tools or the rattle of machinery, as though the ghosts of engineers are still at work keeping the ship alive. Stories of the Hornet's hauntings grew so widespread that paranormal investigators soon took interest. Teams with cameras and recorders spent long nights inside the ship, waiting of the supernatural. What they captured added to the mystery. Strange shadows appeared in places with no light to cast them. Disembodied voices were caught on tape, speaking words like help or here. On one occasion, a group claimed to see a sailor walking down the corridor ahead of them. He turned a corner, and when they followed, the hallway was completely empty. What makes these reports so striking is the sense of continuity they carry. Many of the figures are described wearing uniforms from the 1940s, as if they are frozen in the moment of war, forever tied to the ship that was their home. Visitors speak of young men with determined faces, standing watch on the decks or lingering near the aircraft elevators. Some even say they catch the faint smell of oil and smoke, as though the ship herself remembers the chaos of battle. The Hornet's reputation for hauntings is not limited to whispers and sightings. There are stories of intense physical sensations as well. A sudden drop in temperature in an otherwise warm room. A wave of dizziness or nausea that passes as quickly as it arrives. Feelings of being pressed against a wall by an unseen force. One guest, touring the ship with friends, suddenly froze and began trembling, insisting that someone had grabbed his arm. Yet no one was near him, and the red mark on his skin lingered for hours. For some, these experiences are proof that the Hornet's restless past continues to echo in the present. For others, they are reminders of how memory and atmosphere can shape our minds. A ship as vast as the Hornet carries a heavy presence even without ghosts. Her steel corridors seem endless, her compartments close and airless. At night, the hum of the bay outside mixes with the creaks and groans of old metal, creating sounds that can easily stir the imagination. And yet, When so many different people tell the same stories, it becomes harder to dismiss them as a matter of own. As the USS Hornet grew older, so too did its collection of ghost stories. Many crew members who served on her during her active years came back to visit long after the ship had been decommissioned and turned into a floating museum. What's fascinating is how consistently the accounts line up, even from people who never knew each other. Visitors report seeing men in crisp Navy uniforms walking briskly through the corridors only to vanish when approached. Sometimes they appear on deck, staring out into the sea as if waiting for orders, unaware that the war ended decades ago. These figures are so lifelike that tourists have mistaken them for actors hired by the museum, only to discover later that no reenactors were on duty that day. It's not just fleeting shadows. Workers and volunteers who spend long nights maintaining the ship often speak of phantom footsteps echoing through the steel halls. You can imagine it, the hollow clang of boots against metal, steady and deliberate. But when you turn the corner, the corridor stretches empty and silent. Some volunteers even joke that they share their shifts with extra crew members, though their laughter always carries a nervous edge. They know the Hornet has a heavy past, and they feel it pressing in the quiet hours of the night. One of the eeriest patterns involves the engine rooms. Down below, deep in the heart of the ship, temperatures rise and the air feels heavy. Many sailors once described the engine spaces as suffocating, a place where accidents often happen, and where men sometimes lost their lives during the long months at sea. Today, maintenance crews say the machinery rooms are still alive with strange energy. The clank of unseen tools, the sound of hissing pipes, and even low muttered voices drift through the shadows. One worker swore he heard someone call his name, but when he checked, he was entirely alone. His account is one of many, stacking upon each other like pieces of a puzzle no one can solve. Tour guides share a particularly chilling story of a woman who joined a nighttime tour. While walking down one of the narrow passageways, she suddenly froze. Her face went pale, and she whispered to her friend that she had seen a man standing just inches away from her. He was tall, dressed in the dark blue of a Navy uniform, his eyes fixed forward, unblinking. Before anyone else could react, the figure vanished. The group was stunned, but the woman remained shaken for the rest of the night. Later, she admitted that she had no prior knowledge of the Hornet's haunted reputation. She had simply signed up for the tour out of curiosity. Even seasoned staff members who spend years aboard the ship cannot dismiss what they've experienced. One volunteer described cleaning in one of the mess halls when he noticed movement in the reflection of a polished metal surface. Turning, he saw a sailor moving past the doorway, his uniform neat, his posture upright. When the volunteer rushed to follow, the hall was completely empty. What struck him most wasn't just the sudden appearance, but the expression on the sailor's face, a mixture of focus and weariness, as if he had just finished a long shift and was heading to his bunk. The detail in these sightings is difficult to wave away. They are not vague shadows, but vivid encounters, as if the men of the Hornet are still carrying out their duties, long after the world moved on without them. Psychics and paranormal investigators who visit the Hornet often describe the same sensation before they even step aboard. They talk of a heaviness in the air, as if hundreds of unseen eyes are watching them. Some have claimed to see entire groups of ghostly sailors moving together, almost like a drill or routine exercise frozen in time. One investigator noted that it felt as though the ship itself was alive, holding on to the spirits of those who had served within its walls. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the testimonies are too many and too consistent to ignore. The USS Hornet is not a ghost story told from afar, like the Flying Dutchman vanishing over the horizon. It is a place you can still visit today, where you can step onto its decks and wander its halls. Some come looking for history. Others come seeking a brush with the unknown. And if you stay long enough in the dim light of the ship's interior, you may just hear the steady tread of footsteps keeping pace with your own, belonging to sailors who never truly left. The most chilling encounters often come late at night, when the ship has closed to the public and only a skeleton crew of staff remain. Imagine the stillness of the Pacific air, the distant lapping of water against the hull, and the metallic groan of the ship as it shifts slightly in the current. In that silence, echoes carry differently. A faint cough from a deserted corridor, the shuffle of boots along a catwalk, or the sudden slam of a hatch that no human hand touched. It's as though the USS Hornet never entirely left the busy days of war, still alive with activity that belongs to another time. Former sailors who once served aboard her often visit, sometimes decades after their service. Many admit to being overwhelmed by emotions the moment they step aboard. They describe the ship as if it recognizes them, greeting them with the same smells of oil and steel, the same weight of air. For some, those emotions sharpen into something stranger. One retired Navy man reported hearing his name called in a firm, commanding voice, just as it had been shouted across the deck during drills in the 1960s. He followed the sound through the hall, expecting to find an old crewmate pulling a prank, only to find the passageways completely empty. He swore it felt as though the Hornet was calling him back into service. Visitors often talk about the medical bay with hushed reverence. The Hornet saw her share of casualties, and her sickbay bore witness to men in agony, some of whom never recovered. Today, people who walk those narrow spaces report an almost unbearable heaviness. Cold spots linger in corners where the air should be warm. More than once, guests have claimed to see figures lying on the beds, pale and motionless, before blinking and finding the room empty again. One guide told of a tourist who began weeping suddenly during a tour. She said she felt as though dozens of men were crying out around her, their voices pressing into her mind, begging not to be forgotten. And then there are the sounds. Phantom announcements over the intercom, though no power runs through the old system. Snatches of Morse code that seem to come from nowhere, fading in and out like the ship itself is sending messages to the living world. More than one paranormal investigator has captured unexplained recordings, disembodied voices giving commands, or muffled cries echoing faintly in the background of their audio equipment. Skeptics may argue about radio interference, but those who've heard the recordings firsthand describe them as eerily clear, often containing phrases tied to life aboard the ship. The flight deck, where planes once thundered into the sky, is another hotspot for strange activity. Tourists have reported seeing men in flight gear walking across the deck at dusk. Their movements purposeful, their expressions unreadable. Sometimes they simply vanish into the thin evening air. Other times, they walk straight toward the edges, fading just before stepping over into the sea. Staff members tell of a recurring figure, a young pilot in his helmet, standing motionless at the edge of the deck as though waiting for clearance to take off. The image is so real that some have tried to call out to him only to be met with silence before he disappears. What makes these stories more compelling is the consistency across generations. Children, who often know nothing of the Hornet's history, describe seeing sailors on the decks. They point out details of uniforms or equipment that only veterans would recognize. One story tells of a little boy tugging his mother's sleeve and asking why the man with the shiny buttons wouldn't answer him. The mother saw no one there, but later, when shown photographs of Navy uniforms, the boy eagerly pointed to one that matched exactly what he had described. Perhaps the most unsettling reports involve direct interactions. A few visitors say they felt a firm hand on their shoulder, guiding them down a corridor, only to turn and find no one there. Others recall hearing whispered warnings, urging them to leave certain areas. These aren't simply glimpses of the past, but moments that suggest awareness, spirits that notice the living and choose to make contact. For some, this is terrifying. For others, it feels like a reminder that the sailors still guard their ship, still fulfilling their duty even in death. Even skeptics who dismiss the idea of ghosts admit that the Hornet carries an energy unlike any other museum. Its walls are steeped in memory, its decks echo with footsteps, both remembered and unexplained. It stands as a living relic of war, but also as a vessel of mysteries that no amount of history books can explain away. To step aboard is to step into the company of men who may have left their bodies long ago, but remain tethered to the steel bones of this ship. And for those who listen carefully, the Hornet has many more stories to whisper in the quiet hours of the night. Among the countless accounts tied to the Hornet, some have grown so well known that they have become part of the ship's lore, passed along by staff as often as they share historical facts. One of the most repeated stories involves the sailors seen in the berthing compartments, the narrow sleeping quarters where men once rested between long shifts. Multiple visitors have described seeing him lying back in his bunk, boots on, cap pulled slightly over his eyes as though stealing a moment of rest. He appears so solid that people have mistaken him for a wax figure or a stage display. But when they look again, the bunk is empty, the sheets unwrinkled, and the silence too deep. There's also the tale of the angry mechanic. Volunteers working below deck have described a figure who appears briefly in the machinery room. He is often seen bent over, tools in hand, before straightening suddenly, his face twisted in frustration. Witnesses say he sometimes makes eye contact before disappearing. Those who have felt his presence describe it as heavier than others, almost suffocating. Some believe he may be one of the sailors who died in an accident in those very compartments, his spirit bound by the work that cost him his life. One story comes from a paranormal investigation group that spent a night aboard. While in the officers' quarters, they set up cameras and voice recorders, asking simple questions into the quiet. Hours later, while reviewing their tapes, they heard a distinct response. A man's voice, crisp and unmistakably firm, replied to their question about who was present. The single word "captain" echoed through their headphones. The group insisted no one in their party had spoken, and no staff had been present at the time. It was as though an officer had briefly stepped forward, still announcing his presence, still holding command on a ship that hasn't sailed in decades. The Hornet also has its share of stories involving smells, phantom scents that arise suddenly and vanish just as quickly. Guests report the strong aroma of cigarette smoke in places where smoking has been banned for years. Others smell oil, gunpowder, or even food being prepared in the galley, though the kitchens have long been cold. These sensory fragments feel like echoes of the daily lives of sailors, moments frozen and replayed without warning, reminding us that the ship was once alive with noise, routine, and thousands of men working together. For some, these encounters feel protective rather than frightening. A volunteer once recalled being alone, working in a hazardous area, when he slipped on a slick patch of oil. Just before hitting the ground, he felt a strong hand grab his arm and steady him. When he turned, no one was there. He was certain that if he had fallen, he might have been badly hurt. Instead, he walked away, shaken but uninjured. To this day, he believes a sailor's ghost was still on duty, still looking out for those aboard. The sheer number of sightings on the USS Hornet has earned it a reputation as one of the most haunted ships in the world. Paranormal researchers rank it alongside legendary sites like the Queen Mary, and skeptics who once boarded to disprove the tales often leave with questions they cannot answer. Some describe feeling drained after only a few hours aboard, as though the weight of the ship's memories pressed against them. Others say they left feeling strangely comforted, as though they had shared space with men who were proud of their service and unwilling to fade into obscurity. But why does the Hornet hold on to so many spirits? Some believe it is the sheer number of lives that passed through her halls. Hundreds of men lost during her years of service, many more injured, countless others leaving behind their sweat, tears and memories etched into the steel. War leaves scars not just on land and people, but on the places where it is fought. Ships like the Hornet absorb those emotions, those final moments of fear and bravery, and now replay them in endless loops, unable to let go. Others suggest that it is the devotion of the sailors themselves. For many, the Hornet was more than a ship. It was a home, a family, and a defining part of their lives. Perhaps in death, some chose to remain, unwilling to abandon the decks they once called their own. And perhaps in some way, the Hornet holds them close, the bond between man and machine stretching beyond time. To walk the Hornet today is to walk in two worlds at once. In daylight, she stands as a proud museum, a monument to history and sacrifice. But when night falls, when the quiet takes over and shadows pool in the corners, she becomes something else entirely, a place where the line between past and present blurs, where footsteps echo with no source, and where sailors long gone still keep watch. For those who step aboard, the question lingers. Are you walking through empty steel, or are you stepping into the company of ghosts still loyal to their ship? The USS Hornet doesn't answer directly. Instead, it offers whispers in the dark, fleeting figures, and the unshakable sense that you are never alone. The Pacific Ocean is vast, stretching like an endless sheet of blue that holds both wonder and dread. For centuries, it has been a stage for stories of ghostly ships drifting across the horizon, sometimes appearing in perfect silence, other times found abandoned, their crews gone without a trace. Among these legends, the tales of Japanese ghost ships stand out, carrying with them an eerie blend of folklore, tragedy, and mystery. They are stories of vessels that emerge from the mist, weather-beaten and hollow, floating reminders of lives lost and questions left unanswered. One of the oldest strands of Japanese maritime lore revolves around what are called the funayure. These are the spirits of those who died at sea, said to wander the waters in search of company or revenge. Fishermen tell of nights when the sea is unnaturally calm, and yet they hear voices calling from the waves. Lanterns glow faintly in the distance, as if a ship sails close by. But when the fishermen light, it disappears. Sometimes a vessel will emerge, an old, broken ship, its sails torn, its deck eerily quiet. If approached, the ship dissolves back into mist. To the people of coastal Japan, these encounters are not simple tricks of light. They are warnings from the restless dead. Folklore says that the funayure will sometimes demand a ladle or bucket of water from passing boats. If the living hand won over, the spirits will begin scooping water into the vessel, trying to sink it. To protect themselves, sailors carried ladles with holes drilled into them, so that no water could ever be kept. This belief was so deeply ingrained that families passed down protective practices, and fishermen even avoided sailing on certain nights when ghost ships were more likely to appear. Though these stories may sound like superstition, they were very real to those who depended on the sea for survival. And perhaps in some way, the legends carry fragments of truth, memories of real disasters at sea that left behind more questions than answers. The 20th century brought new layers to these ghost ship tales, especially during and after the chaos of World War II. The Pacific became a graveyard for countless ships, many sunk in battle, others lost to storms, sabotage, or sheer misfortune. Among them are Japanese ships said to still wander the waters. Fishermen and naval patrols have reported seeing aging warships drifting silently, their decks empty, their hulls scarred with rust. Sometimes they vanish when approached, leaving only ripples behind. Other times, they are found floating aimlessly, crewless, as if abandoned in the middle of a voyage. One of the most chilling aspects of these stories is how often the ships appear fully intact. Unlike wrecks battered by time, these ghostly vessels look ready to sail, their structures standing strong, their outlines sharp against the horizon. Sailors who spot them describe a strange stillness, as if the air itself pauses. Birds avoid flying overhead, and the waves seem to grow quieter. And then, just as suddenly as they appeared, the ships fade into the fog, leaving behind an emptiness that lingers in memory. In more recent years, the stories have taken on a modern twist. Japan's long history of shipwrecks and maritime tragedies has given rise to accounts of ghostly vessels that wash ashore. Some are small fishing boats found drifting into coastal villages with no one aboard. Others are larger, mysteriously arriving on remote beaches with signs of life, a pot of rice left half-cooked, clothing neatly folded in the cabin, yet not a single crew member remains. To those who discover them, these derelicts feel more like haunted houses than abandoned ships, filled with the silence of questions that will never be answered. Perhaps most unsettling are the tales of ships that seem to carry with them a presence, an atmosphere of despair. Fishermen describe sensing eyes watching from empty decks. Visitors who board these vessels often leave quickly, feeling cold despite the warmth of the sun. And always, the same question rises. What happened to the crew? Were they lost to storms, to the depths, or to something far stranger that cannot be explained? The Japanese ghost ships of the Pacific remind us that the ocean is not just a place of travel and trade. It is also a keeper of secrets. Beneath the waves lie stories of battles fought, of families torn apart, of sailors who never made it home. And sometimes, those stories rise back to the surface, carried on broken hulls and phantom decks, waiting for someone to notice before the sea swallows them once again. In the last decade, the Japanese coastline has seen a growing number of ghost ships appearing without warning. Many of these vessels are small wooden fishing boats, weather-beaten and scarred by the sea, found drifting helplessly into Japan's northern shores. The scenes discovered are unsettling. Some boats are completely empty, stripped of any signs of human life. Others are far more disturbing, containing skeletal remains of crew members, their identities unknown, their journeys ended in silence. The media often reports these incidents with a focus on their mysterious nature, and for good reason. In many cases, the boats have no working engines, no fuel, and no navigational equipment that could explain how they managed to drift such long distances. The ocean currents pushed them toward Japan, but where they came from and what fate befell those aboard is not always clear. Some are believed to originate from North Korea, the remnants of desperate fishing expeditions gone wrong. Yet the way these vessels arrive, empty, silent, carrying only death, gives them a presence that feels far beyond mere tragedy. They arrive like offerings from the sea, stark reminders that its power is both relentless and unforgiving. Fishermen in northern Japan speak of these ghost ships in hushed tones. Many avoid discussing them directly, as if the very words invite bad luck. To encounter one on the open ocean is seen as a terrible omen. The sight of a drifting vessel, its bow rising and falling on the waves, no crew visible on deck, is enough to chill even the most experienced sailor. Some claim that at night, faint lights flicker aboard these drifting boats, as if lanterns are still being carried through the cabins. Yet when the ships are boarded, nothing remains but darkness. One of the most unsettling reports came from a coastal village where a boat washed ashore carrying several bodies. Locals who approached the wreck described feeling a heavy atmosphere on it, as if the air itself resisted their steps. Some swore they heard whispers inside, though the boat was silent and still. It took days before authorities removed the vessel, but long after it was gone, villagers reported hearing the creak of wooden planks near the shore at night, as if the ghost ship had left part of itself behind. Not all ghost ship encounters are tied to wreckage. Some are purely spectral, appearing where no physical ship could possibly be. Japanese fishermen tell stories of seeing old wooden vessels gliding silently through the fog, their sails torn, their decks shadowed by indistinct figures. These sightings often occur during the quietest hours before dawn, when the sea feels endless and the mind is most open to fears. The vessels drift slowly, keeping pace with the living boats before vanishing like smoke. Some fishermen believe these are the funayurei still at work, appearing not to harm, but to remind the living of the dangers hidden beneath the waves. There are even legends of entire fleets appearing at once. In some coastal tales, men claim to have seen dozens of small fishing boats rise from the mist together, moving in eerie silence. Their sails were glowing faintly, and shadowy figures stood motionless on deck. These phantom fleets never last long. Within moments, they disappear into the fog. But those who see them insist the memory stays forever. The silence of those moments is not natural silence, but the kind that weighs heavily, as if the sea itself is holding its breath. Modern Japan, with its bustling cities and advanced technology, might seem far removed from the old fears of the sea. Yet the ghost ship stories continue, passed from mouth to mouth, written in local papers, whispered in fishing villages. Technology may change, but the ocean remains what it has always been, a vast and unpredictable realm. And in that vastness, ghost ships continue to drift, blurring the line between the living and the dead. Counter them, these ships are not just mysteries to solve. They are reminders of the fragility of life at sea, of the countless men and women who set out with hope and never returned. Each ghost ship that appears carries not only silence, but also a message, a memory of those lost to the ocean, and a warning that the waves do not forgive. Among the most striking stories tied to Japanese ghost ships are those that reach back to the wartime years, when the Pacific was a battlefield and countless vessels were lost to combat, storms, and despair. Entire crews vanished in moments, swallowed by torpedoes, bombs, or the unforgiving waves. Yet sailors in the decades since have reported seeing these same ships return, drifting across the horizon as though time had not touched them. One particularly chilling account comes from the waters near Okinawa, where fishermen claim to have seen a military transport ship appear suddenly in the mist. Its silhouette was sharp, its decks bristling with equipment, but no sound came from it. Not the churn of engines, not the call of men. Witnesses described seeing figures standing in rows on the deck as if waiting for orders. The men were motionless, their outlines clear in the moonlight. When the fog shifted, the ship dissolved into the night. Later, when historians examined records, they noted that several Japanese transports had been sunk in those waters during the final months of the war. Their crews never recovered. Another story tells of a cargo ship rumored to have been torpedoed off the coast of the Philippines. Survivors reported that many of the comrades were trapped inside the sinking vessel, their cries for help echoing through the dark. Decades later, merchant ships passing through the area began reporting strange encounters, a phantom freighter drifting close to their path, with lights faintly glowing in its cabins. Some claimed to hear faint cries carried on the wind, as though the men who perished were still trapped within the ghostly hull, endlessly calling out across the waves. Not all tales are linked to war. In more peaceful times, Japan has also faced the wraith of storms and tsunamis that left behind strange apparitions. One coastal legend speaks of a fishing village struck by a violent storm centuries ago. Dozens of boats were lost, their crews drowned. For years afterward, fishermen in the area swore that on stormy nights they would see those same boats rise from the waves, their lanterns glowing faintly as they drifted toward the shore. The spirits of the drowned men were said to knock on the sides of living boats, begging to be brought aboard. Those who ignored the knocks were left in peace, but those who answered risked vanishing into the storm, never to return. These stories of phantom fleets and spectral sailors are not confined to the past. Even in recent decades, naval officers and merchant mariners have filed reports of unexplained vessels in Japanese waters. Radar systems occasionally pick up a ship where none exists. Lights appear on the horizon, keeping pace with real vessels before fading away. Some modern crews laugh these incidents off as glitches or tricks of the sea, but others believe the old legends are simply continuing into the present, wearing new disguises in a world of steel and electronics. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of Japanese ghost ship lore is how it often blends real tragedy with supernatural mystery. The derelict boats that wash ashore with skeletal remains remind us that the ocean can claim lives in silence. Yet at the same time, the phantom fleets seen in the fog remind us that not all who are lost stay silent. Some linger, repeating their final voyages again and again, bound to the sea that took them. There's a phrase often whispered among coastal villagers: the sea remembers. To the people who live along Japan's shores, this saying is not poetic, but literal. They believe the ocean holds on to everything it takes, and sometimes it gives fragments back, not as they once were, but as shadows, echoes, or warnings. A broken boat washing ashore, a phantom warship rising from the mist, a fleet of glowing sails appearing during a storm, all are reminders that the past is never entirely gone. For those who encounter these ghost ships, the experience is not easily forgotten. They speak of an atmosphere that clings to them afterward, a lingering sense of unease as though the sea has imprinted its secrets on their minds. Some dream of the vessels they saw, reliving the moment night after night. Others avoid the ocean entirely, unwilling to risk another brush with the unknown. The stories become part of them, just as the ships become part of the sea. And always the same question hangs in the air. Are these ghost ships merely fragments of human imagination, shaped by fear and folklore? Or are they something deeper, the souls of the lost, still sailing, still searching, refusing to sink completely into oblivion? The Pacific offers no answers. It only offers silence, fog, and the occasional glimpse of sails where no sails should be. Sailors whisper that the Pacific remembers every life claimed by its waves. In the shadows of storms and long stretches of calm, the ocean holds onto memories, giving them form in ways that confuse and unsettle. These ghost ships, often Japanese in origin, remind us that sometimes the sea refuses to release those it has taken. For the people who encounter them, the experience is both terrifying and strangely mesmerizing, as though the water itself has chosen to show its power. One of the most chilling aspects of these stories is how sudden they appear. A calm horizon, a normal day of sailing, and then without warning a ghostly outline forms against the mist. Some fishermen recall seeing the faint glimmer of lanterns aboard these spectral vessels, swaying gently as if the crew was still alive, still performing the endless duties of ship life. The glow is pale, softer than firelight, yet impossible to ignore. Many describe it as a blue-white shimmer that dances across the deck before disappearing in an instant, leaving only the darkness of night behind. Legends tell of ships whose crews look perfectly alive until they are approached. As the distance closes, the figures on deck begin to fade, their forms unraveling into smoke or scattering like ash caught in the wind. Some sailors claim to have heard the distant voices of these ghostly crews, calling orders in Japanese, shouting commands during a storm, or simply singing softly into the night. These disembodied voices carry across the water, thin but distinct, as though sound itself refuses to let go of the people who once made it. One particularly well-known tale involves a freighter spotted after World War II. Fishermen swore they saw it drifting near the coast, its massive shape silent, its deck tilted slightly from years of disrepair. Yet when they tried to draw closer, the freighter seemed to pull away, as though carried by a current no one else could see. No crew was visible. No movement stirred the deck, but a strange sound rose over the water, like hundreds of boots marching in perfect unison. By the time the fishermen reached the spot, there was nothing but open sea. It is not just the visual apparitions that haunt the Pacific. Many ships report strange electrical disturbances when encountering these ghost vessels. Compasses spin wildly. Radios pick up fragments of old Japanese transmissions, and lights flicker without cause. Some captains even write in their logs about hearing SOS signals that repeat endlessly, only to fade when pursued. These signals often seem decades old, echoes of distress calls long since silenced. Were they recorded in the atmosphere, trapped in the fabric of time itself? Or are they truly the voices of sailors trying to reach across the veil of death? For Japanese culture, the sea is both a giver of life and a keeper of souls. Shinto beliefs speak of restless spirits, and the ocean is often viewed as a place where these spirits linger. Fishermen tell stories of funayuri, the vengeful ghosts of those who died at sea. According to legend, these spirits rise from the water and demand that passing ships give them a ladle. If given one with a bottom, the spirits cannot fill it and are forced to vanish, sparing the vessel. But if given a proper ladle, they use it to flood the ship, dragging it and its crew beneath the waves. When people speak of ghost ships, many connect them to these funayuri, imagining whole crews trapped in eternal unrest, their ships forever sailing without reaching shore. The cultural weight of these stories keeps them alive even in modern times. In fishing villages across Japan, tales of ghostly ships are passed from generation to generation, not as mere superstition, but as reminders of respect. The ocean feeds, but it also takes, and its power must never be underestimated. Fishermen still leave offerings at shrines near the shore, praying for safe passage and hoping not to encounter those phantom vessels that drift through the fog. Maritime researchers have attempted to explain some of these sightings. Ghost ships could be mirages caused by light bending across layers of warm and cool air, making distant vessels appear close and eerie. Others suggest they are abandoned ships, left adrift for years, weathering storms until they look skeletal and haunted. Yet even with these explanations, the stories persist because the sightings rarely match ordinary logic. Ships seen glowing, disappearing, or producing ghostly sounds are difficult to dismiss as illusions. When sailors gather at port, often with drinks in hand and the night stretching ahead of them, these tales resurface. A man might lean forward, lowering his voice, and swear that he once saw an entire crew of shadowy figures rowing through the mist, their faces hidden, but their movements synchronized. Another might insist he heard a ship's bell toll 3 times in the distance, even though no ship had been there for weeks. These stories are not spoken as jokes, but with the heavy sincerity of those who know the ocean's mysteries cannot be laughed away. And so the Japanese ghost ships remain part of the larger tapestry of haunted seas. They are warnings and wonders, tragedies and mysteries combined. Each story adds to the sense that the Pacific is not just water and waves, but a living memory, keeping the presence of the lost alive in ways the living cannot fully understand. Whether as drifting hulks, glowing vessels, or the spectral echoes of long-dead sailors, these ghost ships remind us of the fragility of life at sea and the enduring power of the unknown. The sea stretches across our planet like a restless blanket, always shifting, never still, and within its depths lie stories as wide as the waters themselves. In every corner of the world, sailors and travelers have spoken of phantom ships, ghostly vessels that appear without warning, glide silently across the waves, and vanish before anyone can reach them. These spectral encounters are not bound to one nation or one culture. They ripple outward, appearing in the icy waters of the north, in tropical seas near the equator, and along storm-tossed coasts where wrecks are common. No matter where you go, it seems the ocean finds a way to remind humanity of its mysteries through the shape of a ship sailing where none should be. One of the most enduring stories comes from the British Isles, where fishermen along the coast of Cornwall whisper about ghostly vessels emerging through the fog. In these tales, lights flicker along the masts like lanterns swaying in a storm, but no sound follows. The ships pass silently, with sails full of wind that never touches the water. Locals often connect these sightings to tragedies at sea, believing the apparitions to be echoes of lost fleets or doomed smugglers who once tried to outrun the Crown's ships. Even today, some claim to have seen faint silhouettes drifting across moonlit horizons, as though the past still sails beside the present. Sailors in Scandinavia tell their own tales of phantom vessels, often linked to Viking ships. In the far north, where the nights stretch long and the seas roar with icy tempests, legends describe glowing ships appearing at dusk. The phantom longships ride the waves with fierce speed, their dragon-headed prows cutting across the dark water. Witnesses claim to see shadowy figures moving along the decks, as though warriors of old still sailed to battles long finished. These visions are seen as omens, signs that storms are near, or that someone will soon be claimed by the sea. The Vikings themselves believed that ships carried not only warriors, but also their spirits into the afterlife. And perhaps that belief lingers, shaping the sightings even now. Far across the world, the Caribbean holds its own collection of haunted waters. Among the most chilling legends is that of a Spanish galleon seen drifting near the Bahamas. Sailors report spotting the massive silhouette on calm nights, its sails torn, its hull rotting, yet somehow floating without sinking. Those who say they've seen it describe a golden glow on the deck, as though the treasure it once carried still shimmers in ghostly form. The Caribbean has always been a crossroads of history. Pirates, explorers, and colonizers all fought and sailed across its blue waters. With so much blood spilled and so many lives lost, it is no wonder the region is filled with whispers of ghostly vessels that refuse to find rest. Another chilling story comes from the coast of South Africa. Here tales tell of a phantom ship appearing near the Cape of Good Hope. Fishermen claim to see a glowing outline cutting through stormy seas, vanishing when approached. Unlike the Flying Dutchman, this vessel is not tied to a single legend, but rather appears as a recurring vision for sailors who brave those dangerous waters. Many connect the sightings to the countless shipwrecks that litter the Cape, where fierce winds and hidden rocks have swallowed vessels for centuries. To see the phantom ship, they say, is to be reminded of how thin the line is between survival and disaster in those unforgiving seas. In South America, particularly along the coasts of Chile and Peru, People tell stories of Caluche, a legendary ghost ship said to sail the waters near the island of Kilo. The Caluche is unlike many phantom vessels in that it is described as both terrifying and strangely beautiful. Locals say it glows brightly, illuminating the sea as it passes, and that music and laughter spill from its deck as though a party is happening among the dead. According to folklore, the ship is crewed by drowned sailors who are taken aboard after their deaths and forced to serve forever. The ship is said to disappear into mist as quickly as it appears, leaving only the sound of music echoing faintly across the waves. For the people of Kilo, the Caluche is not only a ghost story, but also part of their cultural fabric, passed down for generations as both a warning and a reminder of the sea's enchantment. These phantom ships are not confined to the old world or to remote islands. Even modern sailors crossing major trade routes have reported mysterious vessels. Tanker crews in the Indian Ocean have told of spotting small fishing boats drifting unnaturally in the night, only for them to vanish when approached. In some cases, radar systems pick up ships that are not physically there, blips on the screen that seem to move with intention before fading away. These reports blur the line between technology and superstition, suggesting that even with modern tools, the ocean keeps its secrets intact. In the waters of North America, sailors and locals alike have whispered of phantom ships for centuries. One of the most famous is the ghost ship of the Northumberland Strait, which runs between Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and New Brunswick in Canada. For generations, people living along the shore have described seeing a three-masted schooner ablaze with fire. Witnesses often say the ship appears suddenly in the twilight, its sails consumed in red and orange flames, yet the fire never seems to destroy it. Instead, the vessel drifts silently until it fades into mist or vanishes with the coming of dawn. Some have even attempted rescues, rowing out toward the burning ship only to find nothing there. The image has become so familiar in maritime folklore that locals no longer question its reality. They see it as part of the strait's identity, a haunting reminder of the lives lost to shipwrecks in those icy waters. Another striking tale comes from the Great Lakes of the United States, where sailors have long shared stories of phantom vessels. The Great Lakes are notorious for shipwrecks due to sudden storms and treacherous waters, and many claim that certain wrecks refuse to rest. The Bannockburn, a Canadian freighter that vanished in Lake Superior in 1902, is sometimes called the Flying Dutchman of the Great Lakes. Sailors swear they've seen its outline drifting through fog, appearing without warning and vanishing just as quickly. Some describe its deck crew as shadowy figures with hollow eyes, staring out across the lake as though forever lost. The sight of the Bannockburn is often seen as an omen of bad weather, a warning to sailors to tread carefully, as if the lake itself is trying to communicate through its ghostly messenger. In Asia, other phantom ships tell equally eerie tales. Along the coast of China, fishermen sometimes speak of ghostly junks, ancient wooden vessels that were once the lifeblood of maritime trade. These ghostly ships are said to appear during stormy nights, glowing faintly in the distance, their red sails catching winds that no one else can feel. Some locals believe they are the spirits of traders who perished at sea, forever repeating their journeys across the coastlines of East Asia. A similar story exists in the Philippines, where fishermen claim to see glowing ships sailing across the horizon, vanishing when the first rays of morning light touch the water. For many, these apparitions are reminders of how fragile life at sea is, how easily a storm or hidden current can erase even the strongest vessel. The Indian Ocean carries its own collection of mysteries. Sailors from Madagascar to Mauritius share tales of phantom ships seen during monsoon season. when storms roll violently across the waters. One story speaks of a ship whose sails glow faint green, like sea foam lit by moonlight. Witnesses insist they can hear the faint sound of drums and chanting echoing across the waves, though no vessel is visible to the naked eye. These encounters are treated with respect, even fear, for in these regions, the ocean is deeply tied to cultural beliefs about spirits and ancestors. To see a phantom ship may be interpreted as a sign from the dead, a message from those who never return from the sea. Australia, too, has its share of maritime ghost stories. Off the coast of Western Australia, sailors have reported seeing ghostly clippers, tall and proud, their sails shining in the night. These ships are often described as more real than illusions, with some even noting the creak of wood and the splash of oars as they pass. Yet when pursued, the water is empty and the silence of the ocean resumes. In some Aboriginal traditions, the sea is connected to ancestral spirits, and ghostly vessels may be seen as guardians or watchers rather than threats. This blending of indigenous beliefs and sailor folklore creates a unique understanding of phantom ships in the southern seas. Even Antarctica, one of the most isolated places on Earth, has not escaped these eerie accounts. Explorers venturing near the icy continent have claimed to see ghostly ships drifting near the horizon, appearing out of the fog only to vanish in the same instant. Some suggest these are illusions created by the extreme atmospheric conditions of the polar regions, where light bends strangely across ice and mist. Yet those who have witnessed them often speak with a seriousness that dismisses the idea of tricks of light. For men and women who risk their lives exploring these frozen waters, the sight of a phantom ship was not something to laugh away, but a sign that even at the ends of the earth, mystery finds its place. From blazing schooners to glowing junks, from vanished freighters to festive ghost ships, the world's oceans are filled with phantom vessels whose appearances defy explanation. They are not bound by time or technology, showing themselves to fishermen, explorers, and modern sailors alike. Forms are as varied as the cultures that describe them, yet the core of each story remains the same. A ship without a home, forever caught between life and death, sailing seas that hold more secrets than answers. As we continue across the globe, the tapestry of phantom ships grows even richer, weaving together folklore, faith, and first-hand encounters. Some of the most unsettling tales come not just from the open seas, but also from rivers and harbors, where phantom vessels appear in places thought to be safe from maritime dangers. These sightings remind us that ghost ships are not always confined to the edges of the world. Sometimes they drift uncomfortably close to the lives of ordinary people. In New England, along the coastlines of Maine and Massachusetts, sailors and townsfolk alike have long shared stories of spectral vessels. One of the most famous is the ghostly clipper ship of New Haven Harbor. In the 1600s, a vessel set out to sea only to vanish without a trace. Months later, residents claimed to see its outline in the skies above the harbor, as though the heavens themselves carried its spirit back. The apparition glowed faintly, the sails snapping in a wind that no one on shore could feel. Witnesses said the ship hovered silently before dissolving into the mist, leaving behind a chilling sense of finality. To many, this was not a mirage, but the final goodbye of a crew that never returned. For centuries, the story has been told and retold, transforming into one of America's earliest and most enduring ghost ship legends. Further south, along the waters of the Gulf of Mexico, there are stories of pirate ships still sailing beneath the moonlight. The Caribbean may hold the most famous tales of pirate phantoms, but the Gulf has its own lore, shaped by privateers and raiders who once haunted the region. Local fishermen speak of vessels flying tattered black flags, their hulls scarred and cannons visible, though no sound or shot follows their appearance. In some versions of the story, faint laughter or the ringing of bells echoes across the water, eerie reminders of lives cut short by violence and greed. For coastal towns, these legends act as warnings, reminders that the treasures of the sea often come at a terrible price. In Africa, legends of phantom ships are not limited to the Cape of Good Hope. Along the coast of West Africa, traders once spoke of seeing glowing ships that appeared during violent storms, sailing in impossible directions against the wind. Some believed these were omens sent by restless ancestors, others that they were cursed vessels tied to the brutal history of the transatlantic slave trade. The imagery of ghost ships in these waters carries a weight heavier than simple superstition, for they are seen as echoes of unspeakable suffering, ships that carried human souls across oceans under chain. In this way, phantom vessels become symbols of grief as well as fear, haunting reminders of a painful history that refuses to vanish. The Middle East, too, has its maritime mysteries. In the waters of the Red Sea and the Arabian Gulf, sailors once told tales of phantom dhows, traditional wooden ships with curved hulls and lateen sails. These spectral vessels often appeared glowing faintly under the moonlight, their sails full though no wind stirred the surface of the water. Some claimed they were guided by the spirits of sailors who drowned in storms, forever repeating their journeys along ancient trade. Others connected them to jinn, supernatural beings said to inhabit deserts and oceans alike, capable of taking any form. For centuries, these stories lingered in port cities, blending with the rhythms of prayer, commerce, and survival. Across the Pacific, once more, we find haunting tales in Polynesian waters. Island traditions often speak of canoes glowing in the night, crewed by ancestral spirits making their way between worlds. These phantom canoes are not always seen as threatening, but as reminders of lineage and continuity. In Hawaiian tradition, the night marchers, spirits of ancient warriors, are sometimes described as traveling across water in ghostly fleets. Witnesses say they hear drums and chants carried on the wind, followed by the dim outline of canoes illuminated by torchlight. These encounters carry immense cultural weight, for to witness the marchers is to brush against sacred history, the line between life and death blurred by the sea. Even in modern times, the persistence of phantom ship stories proves that they are not just relics of old sailor superstition. During the 20th century, naval crews and commercial sailors have filed reports that echo tales from centuries past. Some recount radar picking up vessels that cannot be seen with the naked eye, their signals vanishing abruptly without explanation. Others speak of approaching ships in open water, only for the vessel to dissolve before impact, leaving behind only restless waves. In each case, the witnesses describe a sense of awe mingled with dread, the unnerving feeling that the sea had momentarily peeled back its veil to show something beyond human understanding. These countless tales reveal a common theme. Phantom ships are never merely about the vessel itself. They are symbols embodying loss, warning, and wonder. They remind those at sea of their vulnerability, no matter how strong their ship or skilled their hands. They embody cultural fears and memories, carrying the weight of drowned sailors, vanished fleets, and whole generations lost to the waves. More than anything, phantom ships connected the living with the dead, the known with the unknown, reminding us that the ocean is not just a highway of trade and travel, but a vast, spiritual place where echoes linger and stories never fully sink. As we reach the last stretch of this voyage through the world's phantom ships, it becomes clear that these stories endure because they strike something deep within the human imagination. The ocean has always been a place of uncertainty, Its depths are unknowable, its storms unpredictable, and its horizons endless. When ships vanish or when voices are lost to the waves, the mind cannot help but search for answers. Phantom ships rise to fill that silence, transforming tragedy into legend and the unknown into something hauntingly familiar. In Europe, one of the most striking tales comes from the Baltic Sea. Fishermen there speak of ghostly galleons drifting near the coasts of Finland and Estonia. These vessels are said to appear particularly in late autumn, when nights grow long and icy winds howl across the water. Witnesses describe entire fleets appearing on the horizon, sails unfurled, moving in eerie unison before vanishing without trace. Some sailors believe these apparitions are the spirits of entire armadas lost during the many wars fought in the region. To see them, they say, is to be reminded of the countless lives swallowed by battles long forgotten. Closer to the Mediterranean, another famous story unfolds. The Orang Medan, a Dutch freighter, allegedly sent out a chilling distress call in the late 1940s. The message claimed that the captain and crew were dead, and moments later, only static followed. When rescuers found the ship, they reported a horrific sight. The entire crew was dead, their faces twisted in fear, and their bodies frozen in strange positions. No cause was ever discovered, and shortly after, the ship itself was said to have exploded and sunk. While some argue the story may be exaggerated or even fictional, the legend of the Orang Medan has drifted into the world of ghost ship lore, carried on the same winds that fuel countless other mysteries. Legends of phantom ships also extend to the Indian subcontinent. Along the shores of Sri Lanka, fishermen tell of a glowing brigantine appearing under a full moon. It is said to be captained by a man who betrayed his crew centuries ago, leaving them to drown while he fled for treasure. The ship appears once every generation, always during the monsoon season, and always accompanied by storms. The sight of it is considered both a curse and a warning. Some say that to witness it is to bring bad luck, while others argue that it is simply a reminder that the sea never forgets acts of betrayal. In the Arctic, where the silence of ice dominates the landscape, phantom ship tales are woven to the harsh reality of exploration. Stories linger about ghostly visions of Franklin's lost expedition, whose ships Erebus and Terror vanished in the mid-19th century. Inuit oral traditions tell of strange wooden vessels seen locked in ice, crewless and silent, yet strangely intact. These sightings blurred the line between reality and legend, especially before the wrecks were rediscovered in modern times. Even now, some explorers claim to feel the presence of those lost crews while navigating the frozen north, as if the spirits of desperate men still linger among the endless sheets of ice. The enduring mystery of phantom ships lies in their ability to defy explanation. They do not behave like ordinary vessels, nor do they obey the laws of time or physics. They drift through centuries, appearing in different eras, their stories adapted to the culture of the people who encounter them. For some, they are omens of disaster. For others, they are guardians or reminders of ancestral ties. For all, they are signs that the sea is more than water and waves. It is memory itself, carrying echoes of every life ever lost upon it. What fascinates most is how these tales share common threads across the globe. Whether in the Caribbean, the Baltic, the Indian Ocean, or the Pacific, people describe ghostly ships glowing in the night, crews that vanish when approached, or vessels that burn endlessly without being consumed. The similarities suggest that humanity, no matter where it sails, interprets the ocean in similar ways. Fear of drowning, awe at the sea's power, and reverence for the spirits of the departed form the backbone of these legends. Modern science offers explanations, optical illusions caused by light refracting in the atmosphere, tricks of fog and reflection, or the simple misidentification of distant ships. And yet, those who have experienced phantom vessels rarely accept these rationalizations. They speak with conviction, certain of what they saw, certain of what they felt. The weight of belief carries these stories forward, keeping them alive even in an age of satellites and radar. As the world grows more connected and seas more mapped, one might expect ghost ship legends to fade. Yet they continue, whispered on fishing boats, repeated in naval barracks, and retold by travelers staring out into the horizon. In every generation, new accounts surface, proving that the ocean's mysteries are far from solved. Phantom ships endure because they are not just stories about the sea. They are stories about us, about loss, longing, and the enduring hope that those taken too soon are still out there, sailing beneath the stars. And so, from blazing schooners in Canada to glowing junks in Asia, from cursed freighters in Europe to ancestral canoes in Polynesia, the phantom ships of the world sail on. They remain a universal reminder that the waters of our planet are not empty but alive with memory, haunted by voices that refuse to sink. To look out across the sea on a quiet night is to wonder what sails just beyond the horizon, waiting to appear, reminding us that some journeys never truly end. The sea has always been a place of freedom, but also of chains, unseen bindings that hold sailors long after their bodies have returned to the earth. Tonight, we enter the sorrowful world of those who are said to be trapped by the sailor's curse, spirits bound forever to the water they once called home. These are not merely the wandering ghosts of those who met their fate at sea. They are souls that cannot escape, tied by oaths, betrayals, or misfortunes that have etched their stories into the rolling tides. From the earliest days of seafaring, men have whispered about curses that cling to those who sail too far or cross the wrong spirit. Unlike the tales of phantom ships that drift across oceans, these stories dwell on the sailors themselves, their voices, their shadows, their footsteps echoing endlessly across decks and shorelines. Sailors are said to be wanderers by nature, but when bound by a curse, that wandering becomes eternal. Imagine standing on a quiet dock long after the last vessel has left for the horizon. The night air smells of salt and tar. Waves slap softly against the posts, and the ropes creak as if tugged by unseen hands. If you listen closely, some say you can hear faint singing, low voices, mournful and heavy, the kind of songs once used to steady a crew through storms. Yet no ship floats nearby, and no crew lingers on the pier. To the locals, these are not echoes of memory, but the restless voices of sailors cursed never to set foot on land again. One of the most enduring beliefs among seafaring cultures is that a sailor who betrays his crew will never know peace. A man who abandons his fellows to save himself, or who cheats another out of his rightful share, is said to be marked by the sea itself. Even death does not loosen this grip. Such men are whispered to walk forever on ghostly decks, repairing sails that never tear, tying knots that never hold, repeating their sins for eternity. Legends from old fishing towns tell of cursed men who drowned far from home, yet whose families still hear their footsteps on the wooden floors at night. Some wives claim to see wet handprints on the walls, salt water pooling beneath doorways as if the ocean itself had followed them inland. Children have woken crying, convinced their father stood at the edge of their bed, dripping with seawater, and whispering in a language they could not understand. These accounts do not describe simple hauntings, but a curse that clings both to the sailor and those he loved, binding the family to grief and fear. The idea of curses upon sailors was often tied to the rituals of the sea. Before setting sail, crews performed quiet traditions meant to guard against disaster. A coin nailed to the mast for good fortune, a small carving etched into the deck, or a shared toast poured into the ocean. To neglect these was to court misfortune. But worse still was the breaking of sacred rules at sea. To kill a fellow sailor in anger, to mutiny against a captain without cause, to desecrate a sacred relic carried aboard. All were said to summon a curse not only on the guilty, but sometimes upon the entire crew. In many parts of the world, people tell of ghostly figures clinging to the rigging of ships. They appear during storms, drenched and half visible, faces pale and eyes hollow. Sometimes they are strangers, unknown to the crew, yet the sailors swear they look like men who once belonged to doomed expeditions, swallowed by the sea decades earlier. These figures are said to warn of impending danger, but they also serve as a reminder. The sailor's curse never fades, and the ocean always remembers. It is not just death that binds these spirits. Some are said to be cursed even in life. Men who survived terrible wrecks only to live in fear that the sea would one day reclaim them. These sailors often carried the weight of guilt. Perhaps they lived while others drowned. Or perhaps they committed acts of betrayal during desperate hours. When they eventually died, their souls were said to slip easily into the waiting arms of the ocean, fulfilling the curse they had always feared. In every fishing village, every coastal town, there are stories of men who never returned, yet never fully left. Their families feel them in the hush of the night, in the sudden chill that sweeps through a warm room, and the sound of boots across a creaking floor. To live by the sea is to know that it does not easily give up what it claims, and for cursed sailors it holds them forever, bound to tides and winds, unseen but always near. When we look beyond the harbors and docks, we find entire cultures shaped by the idea of cursed sailors. In northern Europe, the Vikings were among the first to speak of men doomed to wander the seas forever. For them, the ocean was not just water, but a vast realm ruled by gods and spirits. A sailor who offended these powers might never reach Valhalla. Instead, his soul would drift endlessly across storm-lashed waters, rowing a phantom ship that never reached shore. Old sagas describe ghostly fleets appearing before great storms, spectral longships slicing silently through the mist, manned by pale figures with hollow eyes. To the living, this was both a warning and a curse made visible. The whalers of the 18th and 19th centuries carried their own dark tales. Whaling was one of the most dangerous trades, demanding years away from home and long months trapped in icy seas. Sailors who broke the codes of loyalty on board often became the subjects of curses. One story tells of a whaler who abandoned his mate to the freezing waters of the Arctic, pushing him aside to save his own place in a lifeboat. Though he made it home, he lived the rest of his days haunted by the sound of splashing water at night. His neighbors reported that his boots were always wet, no matter how often he dried them. When he died, it was said that his spirit could be seen clinging to the masts of passing whaling ships, dripping with ice, forever calling out to crews that could not hear him. Sailor curses also carried a strong presence in the Caribbean, where centuries of voyages mixed European superstition with African and indigenous beliefs. Fishermen spoke of the drowned ones, spirits of men who broke their oaths at sea. These ghosts were not quiet wanderers. They were vengeful, pulling at the nets of honest fishermen, dragging anchors into the deep, and sometimes appearing in the dead of night to demand rum or offerings tossed into the water. Coastal communities learned to leave small gifts at the shoreline, offerings of food or drink, in the hope of keeping the cursed souls appeased. Without such rituals, boats boats would return damaged, or men would fall mysteriously ill after venturing out to fish. What makes these stories so haunting is how personal they feel. Unlike phantom ships that are distant and grand, cursed sailors appear close, sometimes even within arm's reach. There are countless reports of lone watchmen on ships glimpsing a figure standing at the bow, only to vanish when approached. Some crews told of voices rising in song when no one was on deck, the melody mournful yet familiar, as though sung by a brother long gone. These sightings were not seen as random hauntings, but as signs that a curse still lingered, tethering a man's soul to duties he could never abandon. In Asia, similar legends arose along the coasts of Japan and China. Japanese fishermen believed in the spirits of those lost at sea known as funayurei. These were not simply restless ghosts, but cursed sailors who sought to drag others into the water, jealous that they themselves had drowned. Sailors carried charms and recited prayers before leaving shore, knowing that once a spirit of the drowned locked onto a ship, it might follow them for days. Even the most experienced captains whispered of cursed men who appeared in sudden squalls, clinging to the sides of vessels, faces pale and hair matted with seawater. If ignored, these spirits grew violent, and the sea itself seemed to rise against the ship. What ties all these traditions together is the sense of a contract between man and the sea. Sailors understood that their lives depended on respect. To break it was to invite a curse, one that could last far longer than life itself. And so the stories continued, shared in candlelit inns on rocking decks and around fires on shorelines. Each tale was a warning. To live dishonorably at sea was to bind your spirit to the waters forever. The sorrow in these stories is almost as powerful as the fear. Many accounts describe cursed sailors returning not to harm, but to linger near loved ones. Wives spoke of hearing knocks at the window during storms, as though their husbands were begging to be let in from the cold sea. Children would dream of voices calling them from the shore, only to wake with sand scattered across their bedsheets. To those left behind, it felt as if the sea was keeping their loved ones close, but never letting them come home. The sailor's curse is, at its heart, a story of longing, a spirit trapped between the life it once knew and the endless horizon it can never escape. And for those who hear the whispers of waves at night, or feel the sudden chill of salt air far from the coast, there is always the thought, perhaps a cursed sailor has wandered close, still bound to tides that will never set him free. One of the most chilling tales comes from Cornwall, where the coastline is carved by jagged cliffs and hidden coves. For centuries, local fishermen spoke of cursed sailors who wandered there, forever tied to the rocks and tide. They called them the storm men, figures seen pacing along the headlands when tempests gathered. To see one was an omen that ships would be wrecked that very night. Some swore that the storm men were former wreckers themselves, men who once lured ships to their doom with false lights, only to be cursed after death to witness storm after storm, powerless to stop the destruction they once caused. These restless spirits, locals believed, moaned in the wind and rattled the shutters of cottages, demanding that the living remember their treachery. Another tale speaks of the crying boatswain, a ghost said to haunt the North Sea. Sailors claimed that on nights when the fog was thickest, a pitiful wailing could be heard drifting across the waves, as if someone were lost and calling for help. Those who followed the sound found nothing but endless mist. Yet those who ignored it sometimes reported hearing footsteps on their decks, heavy and wet, accompanied by the sound of dripping water. No one ever saw the boatswain's face, but his voice was unforgettable, filled with grief and guilt. Some believed he was a man who had abandoned his crew during a storm, only to die shortly after. Now cursed, he cried endlessly, seeking forgiveness he could never receive. Farther south, sailors in the Mediterranean told of cursed men who appeared not as wandering figures, but as shadows in the water itself. These shapes followed ships at a distance, sometimes circling them for days. To look over the side and see a pale form moving just below the surface was a sign of death, for it meant the sea had claimed one soul and was seeking another. Some accounts tell of men pulled overboard by invisible hands after such shadows appeared, dragged under before anyone could react. In these stories, the curse was not only upon the ghost, but also upon those unlucky enough to see it. Even in modern times, cursed sailor tales continued to ripple through naval crews and divers. During World War II, men stationed in the Pacific often reported seeing shadowy figures standing on the decks of abandoned or wrecked ships. These were not fleeting visions. Some men swore they saw entire groups of sailors, uniforms soaked and faces pale, standing at attention as if waiting for orders that would never come. The idea of cursed sailors watching from the ruins of war-torn vessels became part of the whispered lore among crews, a reminder that the sea kept hold of its dead. Divers exploring wrecks tell similar stories. Off the coast of Scandinavia, a group of divers once reported entering a sunken warship and hearing the faint sound of chains dragging across metal. The deeper they went, the stronger the sense of presence grew, until one diver swore he saw a figure standing at the end of a corridor. Its head was bowed, its posture heavy with exhaustion, as though condemned to patrol the wreck forever. The diver blinked, and the figure was gone. But the water around him felt suddenly colder, pressing in on all sides. When the group returned to the surface, each admitted privately that they had sensed they were not alone. Stories also come from merchant crews traveling long trade routes. In the 20th century, several ships reported sightings of the man in oilskins, a spectral sailor who appeared during storms in the Atlantic. Witnesses described him as dripping wet, with his face obscured by the shadow of his hood. He would walk silently along the deck, ignoring the living, before vanishing near the bow. His presence was taken as a warning that a crew member would soon be lost to the waves. True to the legend, accidents or drownings often followed within days of his appearance. Whether coincidence or curse, the sightings kept the fear alive, and many captains quietly altered their routes after such reports. What gives these tales their staying power is the sense of unfinished duty. A cursed sailor is not simply a ghost wandering without purpose. He is bound by mistakes, betrayals, or desperate final moments that tie him eternally to the sea. His curse is not just his burden, but also a message to the living. Respect the ocean, honor your crewmates, and never forget the price of survival. For every ghostly figure pacing a deck or calling out from the mist, there is a story of regret carved into the waves, a warning that echoes across generations. And as these tales spread from coast to coast, they form a collective memory of humanity's relationship with the sea. The curse of the sailor is not only about punishment, it is about remembrance. To tell these stories is to keep the ghosts alive, bound not just to the tides, but to the minds of those who still venture into the waters where their fates were sealed. Not all cursed sailor tales dwell in the distant past. Even today, stories surface from crews and passengers who claim to have glimpsed figures out of place on the sea. On modern cargo ships, watchmen sometimes report seeing a lone figure standing on the bow, gazing into the horizon. Cameras capture nothing, but men insist they saw boots, a heavy coat, and dripping water pooled at his feet. Once approached, the figure vanishes into the spray. For those who work the night shifts, this is not brushed off as imagination. It is seen as a reminder that the sea keeps watch in its own way, through the souls it has already claimed. cruise ship passengers, too, sometimes whisper of encounters in cabins or on deck. On certain voyages, people speak of hearing knocks on their cabin doors in the dead of night, followed by the sound of wet footsteps walking away. Others describe waking to the sensation of water dripping from the ceiling, though nothing can be found in the morning. A few even tell of pale men in old-fashioned uniforms appearing briefly in mirrored hallways, as if a sailor from another century had stepped across time itself. While many dismiss these accounts as tricks of exhaustion or imagination, they carry the same thread as the oldest tales, a cursed mariner searching for something he can never find. Coastal communities still hold fast to traditions that ward off the presence of these restless souls. In parts of Ireland, it is said that if a drowned sailor returns, his spirit knocks on windows to call family members to the shore. To keep him from entering the home, fishermen once placed salt or iron near their doors, symbols believed to repel cursed spirits. In the Philippines, offerings of rice and fruit are left near the shoreline for wandering sea ghosts, a practice meant to ease their hunger and guide them back to rest. These rituals reflect a simple truth. The world has changed, but our respect for the power of the sea and for the souls it keeps has not. The sailor's curse is often less about vengeance and more about longing. Many stories describe these ghosts not as menacing, but as sorrowful, reaching out for connection. In some accounts, a cursed sailor appears to guide lost ships through fog, his light a spectral beacon that vanishes once safety is reached. In others, he warns crews of storms or equipment failures, almost as if his curse compels him to relive the hardships of the sea while still trying to protect those who remain. These moments blur the line between curse and duty, painting the ghosts not as enemies of the living, but as guardians, bound to serve forever. One particularly haunting modern tale comes from a group of sailors who claim to see a man clinging to the rigging during a violent storm. They rushed to save him, fearing he had been swept overboard. But when the lightning illuminated the deck, they realized he was dressed in garments centuries old, his face pale and eyes sunken. Before anyone could climb toward him, the figure dissolved into the storm. The men later discovered that their ship had once belonged to a fleet that lost dozens of crew in the same waters, men who drowned before help could reach them. For the crew, the connection was too strong to ignore. They believed they had witnessed one of those lost souls, cursed to remain at sea forever. Even divers in the modern age, equipped with advanced technology, find themselves shaken by encounters that echo the sailor's curse. Some describe hearing faint cries beneath the water, or catching glimpses of pale faces in portholes of wrecks. Others report seeing hands pressed against the glass of sunken cabins, though no living person could possibly be inside. These experiences are often left unspoken, as divers know the ocean is a place where silence carries its own weight. And not every story should be told, but they linger in the mind, leaving the sense that the sea is never truly empty. The idea of the sailor's curse continues to endure because it touches on something universal, the fear of being forgotten. A man bound to the sea forever is a man who can never go home, who can never rest in the company of loved ones. His endless wandering becomes both a punishment and a plea. And perhaps that is why these stories have lasted for centuries, carried from one shore to another, repeated in quiet voices when the waves are loud outside. They remind us that behind every shipwreck, every disappearance, there is not just tragedy, but also the possibility of souls who cannot let go. So when the sea wind rattles a window, or a lonely voice seems to echo across the waves, some believe it is not merely the weather, but a cursed sailor calling out from the depths of time. He may not seek to harm, only to be remembered, to remind the living of the fragile line between survival and loss. His curse, then, is not only his own, but also ours, to listen, to carry his story, and to know that the sea keeps what it takes. Yet sometimes, just sometimes, it gives back whispers of those it holds.